Gentlemen, we are live on YouTube, and so welcome. And Glenn, we'll start with you introducing our conference week.
Thank you, Bill. So I'm Glenn Kramer. I'm the chairman of the World Affairs Councils of America. It's a great privilege to kick off our full week of discussions with top executives on the role of business in addressing the urgent challenges the world faces. We have lined up for this week more than a dozen outstanding business leaders to join us in the days ahead for an in-depth series of discussions. It's clear that business needs to play an important role in addressing global issues. We are in a period of unprecedented upheaval. Government leaders, of course, have an important role to play, but I think it's equally evident that the world cannot rely solely on our political leaders to solve problems. All elements of society need to take part in tackling the world's most pressing problems. So the purpose of this week's C-Suite Forum is to engage business leaders on a variety of topics of interest to all Americans. We have chosen leaders from different sectors, from different countries, who in turn will discuss from a variety of angles the fundamental question we are focused on: how can business help address key global challenges? It's an honor to have as our first speaker, David Rubenstein. David is the co-founder and co-executive chairman of the Carlyle Group, one of the leading private equity firms in the country and the world. David is a very active and engaged philanthropic leader. He is involved as a leader in some of the country's most important cultural, educational, and arts institutions. He is the chairman of the John F. Kennedy Center for the Performing Arts. He's the chairman of the Smithsonian Institution. He is the chairman of the Council on Foreign Relations, an organization which is particularly well known to our colleagues at the World Affairs Councils around the country. He's president of the Economic Club of Washington. He's a fellow of Harvard College, a member of the Harvard Corporation, trustee at the University of Chicago. He's a director of the Lincoln Center, the National Gallery for the Arts, the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, Memorial Sloan Kettering, Johns Hopkins Medicine, and on and on. David is an incredible philanthropist, an incredible leader for our country. He's also a great American patriot. David has donated extensively to protect and preserve and enhance our nation's heritage. From the National Monument, the National Mall, the Washington Monument, the Lincoln Memorial, the Jefferson Memorial, and so many other important treasures of our nation's history, David has helped donate to, protect, and preserve and enhance. He's also the host of the David Rubenstein Show, Peer to Peer, on Bloomberg Television. He's the author of several books, including The American Story, and most recently, How to Lead. So with that, it's my great privilege to turn things over to Bill Clifford, CEO of the World Affairs Councils of America, and Bill will interview David. So thank you, David, so much for being with us today. We really appreciate it.
My pleasure to be here. Thank you very much for inviting me.
Glenn, thank you. Thank you for your leadership as our newest chairman of the World Affairs Councils of America. And David Rubenstein, welcome to our CEO Forum. The first time we've done this. We're known for a national conference in November, but we wanted to stretch ourselves beyond our traditional playpen of foreign policy and national security. Perhaps we'll get into some of that too, but I want to welcome you and congratulate you on How to Lead, your new book, Wisdom from the World's Greatest CEOs, Founders, and Game Changers. You're one yourself. I feel humbled to be here with you. As Glenn said, you're a master interviewer on your Bloomberg program and others. You've interviewed virtually everyone of importance that I can think of, one of whom is in your book, Oprah Winfrey, who is a master interviewer herself. And maybe you felt a little bit of the humility that I'm feeling right now. I wonder if Oprah gave you some advice as an interviewer.
Well, Oprah would say, and actually I would like to point out to people that her real name was Orpah, but it was misspelled on her birth certificate. Her parents intended her to be named Orpah, but it came out Oprah, so she kept it. When I interviewed her, I did know her. And the trick to having really good interviews sometimes, in addition to preparation, is knowing the person and making them feel comfortable. But and in fact, what she was really doing was she was conducting a master class in how to be an interviewee and also how to be an interviewer. She was really doing both. She didn't need me. I was kind of there as the prop because she was so good. She didn't really need an interviewer. But one of the most interesting things she said was that she didn't think she was such a great interviewer, but she was a good listener. And she said the key to being a really good interviewer is really listening and then providing empathy to the person you're talking to. And I think that's been the key to her success. She's provided empathy to hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people she's interviewed. And I think that's gone throughout the world and people recognize her skill set in that area.
You got to know Oprah, I guess, or Orpah, as you say, through your mother. You tell an interesting story about how she was an anchor in Baltimore, your whole hometown. Share that with us.
Yes. Oprah is not somebody that I had known when I was growing up in Baltimore, but when I left for college, she showed up in Baltimore as a local newscaster. And my mother would say, David, there's a really good local newscaster here, and this person's going to be famous around the country. I said, well, Mother, there has never been a person from Baltimore who's become a famous national newscaster, so I don't really think so. She said, no, you should watch the person when you come home. So I never got a chance to watch her. And later, my mother turned out, as always the case, to be right. I did, when I became the chairman of the Kennedy Center, the first year we gave an award to Oprah for the Kennedy Center Honors, and I got to meet her for the first time. And I got to introduce her to my mother, which was the big thrill of my mother's life. So that was pretty enjoyable.
You acknowledge your mother and your father, Bob and Betty, in your book, your new book, How to Lead. And I wonder if you could tell us a little bit what it was like for you as a young boy in Baltimore growing up, what the landscape was, what was the parental push really in education, or did they guide you to this career that would lead you to be a billionaire?
Well, I would say that I had the advantage of having two parents who had unconditional love for their only child. I grew up in a blue collar setting. My father was not college or high school educated, nor was my mother. Both of them had dropped out of high school really to get married. My father initially to go into World War II. And then I became the only child that they had. And so when you have, you're the only child, you get a lot of attention. And when your parents put all their energy into you, you obviously, feel it. So my goal in life was not only to make myself a better life than maybe the ones my parents had had, but to make them proud of what I had achieved with their help. So I always tell people that it's very difficult to grow up in a wealthy setting and become very driven and hard and successful. It's not impossible. But mostly the people that are running the world and the people that I interviewed in my book are people that came from lower income families, blue collar families, and so forth. If your father is in the Forbes 400 because he's a talented person, a driven person, the chance of that father or mother producing a driven child is small. It happens, but it's rare. And it's generally the case that somebody that came from a lower blue collar family income or middle class income is the person who has the drive and the willingness to work hard and put in the hours to make a difference. So as we all know, raising a child is the hardest thing in life to do. And it's very challenging. And anybody that's a parent knows it's a 24-hour kind of occupation, and you're never safe. And your child can be 50 years old and you're still always worried about the child. Mm-hmm. So I would say that raising a child is a complicated thing. Jackie Kennedy used to say that if you mess up raising your children, nothing else in life really matters. And I think she was right.
Thank you for that. In the number of people in your book and who you actually, these are amazing interviews because you did them live on TV, but what's incredible is that they hold together in just text. You don't get the body language or really how you are feeling in that sort of chemistry, but the words that come out are amazing. And many of the subjects of your book they all seem to possess that core ingredient of drive and passion. Not all of them were the greatest students. Many were lifelong learners. Talk about the role of education and that variable to leadership.
Well, I tell people all the time that my success, to some extent, people might consider it success, is that I got a good education at a good college, good public high school, good law school. But getting your degrees is not the end of your education. 30% of the people that graduate from college in this country never read another book in their life. So you have to exercise your brain, and your brain is the most important muscle. And as I like to say about Ruth Bader Ginsburg, she only weighed 100 pounds, but 98 pounds of it was her brains. She was brilliant. And I think if you work hard and try to improve your learning all the time, you will be successful. And to me, education is the most important thing you can really do as a young person, is get educated. And I don't like the idea that people say, well, this person's not appropriate for college, or this person shouldn't go to college. He or she should be a blue collar worker. There's nothing wrong with being a blue collar worker. My father was a blue collar worker his whole life. He was very happy with what he did. But college's purpose is not only to give people a chance to make more money, it's to make them a better and a fuller person, to expose them to things that will make their life more enjoyable. So you shouldn't look at college and education as only a way to make more money. And that's why I think some people are making a mistake when they kind of equate college with only the ability to make more money.
Oh, yeah, I'm glad you mentioned Ruth Bader Ginsburg. She's one of the 30 people in your book. I believe she's the only one who has passed away just last week at the age of 87. Talk about Ruth Bader Ginsburg's legacy and why you chose her in the section on decision makers.
Ruth Bader Ginsburg came from very modest circumstances, worked her way up, became a brilliant law school student, and of course she couldn't get a job because she was pregnant when she was looking for one. She was a woman and she was Jewish, and as a result, she rarely could get a job that was really meaningful for her. She did get a teaching job eventually, and worked her way up to be a professor at Columbia, and later became a judge. My former boss, Jimmy Carter, appointed her to the Court of Appeals in D.C., and President Clinton appointed her 27 years ago to be on the Supreme Court. But she was a person who got along with everybody. As we all know, she loved Antonin Scalia, and they would come to the Kennedy Center all the time. And I got to know both of them there. And I would say over the years, when you're the chairman of the Kennedy Center, you get to introduce a lot of prominent people in the audience, and presidents of the United States, secretaries of state, foreign leaders, and so forth. But the person who consistently got the highest standing ovation and the longest standing ovation was Ruth Bader Ginsburg. A president of the United States might get a 2 to 3 minute standing ovation. She would get a 20-minute standing ovation every time. It's because people admired her, not only because she came from modest circumstances, but she did so many things that changed the life of women. And think about it. In the history of our country, we've had maybe 600 or 700 million people live in this country over the time the country started. Only one of them, only one woman has ever been given the honor of lying in state in the Capitol. Only one woman, and it's Ruth Bader Ginsburg.
One of 114 U.S. Supreme Court justices. You know, you mentioned Antonin Scalia, Justice Scalia, who passed away during Obama's term, and his relationship with Ruth Bader Ginsburg. It struck me similarly in a way to Ronald Reagan and Tip O'Neill. That era, when there was still bipartisanship, when there was still camaraderie among people from opposing sides of the aisle. And here we had, when they would go to the opera or what have you, socialize, these two justices from opposite ends of the spectrum in jurisprudence had friendship. Do you think we're entering a phase where we will look back on the court and wish that we had that camaraderie?
Well, the camaraderie that exists among the court members will probably always be there, because you only have 9 people. And if you can't get along with 9 people who you're going to be with for the rest of your life, more or less, it's not a satisfactory situation. They do tend to get along, though I would say in the past that it always hasn't happened. There was a justice of the Supreme Court, Justice McReynolds, who was anti-Semitic. And when Louis Brandeis became a member of the court, he would never sit in the same room with him, wouldn't even stay in the same room with him, let alone talk to him. So we obviously have advanced past that, and those 9 get along. But I do think that in Congress, the camaraderie doesn't quite exist. I've tried to make it better by holding dinners and hosting dinners for Democrats and Republicans around the subject of history. They come, and the members like it, but the era of good feelings hasn't broken out in Congress, and I suspect it's not going to change anytime in the near future. I really don't see it happening. When I worked on Capitol Hill in the 1970s, members of Congress, or both parties, got along with each other. And in fact, not until the Affordable Care Act was passed did a major piece of legislation in this country get passed only with the support of one party. The Social Security Acts, all the New Deal legislation, the Civil Rights Acts, all were bipartisan. That changed, obviously, when the Affordable Care Act came through with not one Republican vote.
For those who are joining our YouTube live stream later than our beginning, I just want to remind you that we're speaking with David M. Rubenstein, who is co-executive chairman of the Carlyle Group, one of the world's largest and most admired private equity companies. And also he is the author of a new book, How to Lead. David, your time in Washington politics, or you worked at the White House under the Carter administration for Stuart Eizenstat as a young man out of law school. What was that experience like for you? How did it shape your career?
Well, many times people who get jobs in the White House staff are not the most qualified in the United States to get those jobs. If you have 330 million Americans, we don't do a survey and say who's the most qualified to work in the White House. If you work in the campaign, you probably have a pretty good chance of getting there. So I worked in the campaign as a junior aide, and my boss went to the White House as the top domestic advisor, and he made me his deputy. So I was lucky. I wasn't qualified for the job. But if you're 4 years out of law school, you're 27 years old, and you have an office in the West Wing, and you're flying on Marine One with the president and Air Force One with the president, you're going to Camp David, it's a pretty heady experience. You can imagine when my parents, who were blue collar workers, they were standing on the South Lawn sometimes, and just the president of the United States and me walking out of the Oval Office, getting on Marine One. That's great stuff. But the balloon burst when we lost the election, because all the people told me how wonderful I was, how smart I was, and called them if I ever wanted a job. When I called them after we lost to Ronald Reagan, they never called back. Because when you're out of power in Washington, as Harry Truman said, you're a dead man. And as Harry Truman also said, if you want a friend in Washington, get a dog. So you're working in the White House. It's a great thrill. You feel like you're doing something for your country. It's a lot of pressure, but you feel like you're doing something to give back to society. But you have to remember, you're temporarily there. And in the end, when you leave, people will treat you the way they treated you probably before you went to the White House.
Now, you're obviously not a shy man, but Stuart Eizenstat, whom you worked for in that White House, to a reporter some years ago, described you as quite shy. And that is not a character trait that I think in this country, unfortunately, is seen as a positive attribute. Some may say it's a flaw. I disagree with that, but to the extent that you overcame that, when did you overcome that? How did you overcome that? And what do you counsel people who are shy to do?
I probably was shy. I mean, I was an only child. I wasn't a big talker. I wasn't all the things that you might want to be in high school. I wasn't a great athlete. I wasn't student body president. I wouldn't say all the young ladies in Baltimore, DC, were dying to go out on a date with me. So I would probably didn't have the self-confidence that I got later in life. So when you work in the White House, you get a little more self-confidence, even though you might lose the election. But later, when my business took off and I got more involved in more projects, I guess I felt more self-confidence. So today, I probably talk more than I should talk, and I'm making up for all the time that I didn't talk when I was much younger.
In your book, you categorized leaders in different ways: visionaries, builders, decision makers, transformers, commanders, masters. When you and your partners at the Carlyle Group in the late 80s were putting together the firm, which of those attributes would you say described you? And did you have a blend among the few of you? I think it was 5.
Yes. Well, it's hard to say. Most people that start companies, even if they turn out to be Microsoft or Facebook or Apple, when people start them, to be realistic, they think they're just lucky to make the payroll the next week or next month. So people have very modest ambitions as a general rule of thumb. We had very modest ambitions. We're 10 people. We didn't have any expansion space. We didn't think we'd ever grow more than 10 people. Well, we got lucky and things worked out, and it turned out to be much better than I ever expected. So I guess I won't say we were any of those things. We were, we had the quality that I described in the leadership qualities that I listed in the beginning of the book. We had luck. As I say, in the qualities I think are important in leadership, number one is luck, and we got a lot of luck.
How lucky do you think were Jeff Bezos and Bill Gates, 2 of the richest men in the world, maybe 1 and 2 still, who happen to both come from or who ended up doing their businesses in Seattle, Washington?
Yes, I interviewed them both together once. The only time they'd ever been interviewed together, it was in a private setting, so there's no transcript of it. And I asked them if there was something in the water there, because they're neighbors. And should I move to that neighborhood? Because think about it, the two richest men in the world happen to live in the same street practically. They said it was circumstantial, and it wasn't. I shouldn't move in the neighborhood. Maybe they didn't want me in the neighborhood. But look, everybody has some luck. Take Bill Gates. Bill Gates is a very smart person, high IQ. There's no doubt about it. But Harvard has a lot of high IQ people, and a lot of schools have a lot of high IQ people. But when you drop out of college, the chance of becoming more successful is probably reduced. So the idea that he would become so successful was, remote. But he turned out to be a very hardworking person as well as very smart. Very often, geniuses tend not to work quite as hard as maybe people that need to work harder. And Bill is very, very smart, but also very, very hardworking, and he had a great vision. So I won't say it was luck, but I would say if he did anything else in life, he'd probably been successful. But it was a little bit lucky that he became so wealthy because a lot of other things went in his direction. The main thing was that IBM decided to not basically buy the software operating system from him. Had they done so, he would not have built the company. They made a mistake. In Jeff Bezos' case, he didn't invent the idea of selling books over the internet. That was being done by lots of people. He came up with a way of maybe making it a little bit better, but his great invention was actually selling everything over the internet. His idea was originally only sell books, but then he realized he could sell other things, and that's what really made his great fortune.
And he didn't panic when his stock went down from $113 to $6 in the dot-com boom. What do you think of Bezos and Gates as risk takers? Did they maintain that quality throughout their careers?
Think of them as what?
Risk takers.
Risk takers. I'm sorry.
How important is that to their leadership?
When you're at the bottom and you're trying to get to the top, it's not such a big risk. So when Bill Gates dropped out of college, I wouldn't say it's the biggest risk anybody's ever taken because he could have gone back to Harvard. It was a risk, of course, but his life wouldn't have been over had he not, succeeded there. Same with Jeff. Jeff had some money. He wasn't very wealthy, but had he not succeeded, he would have been successful somewhere else. So they did take risks, and they took big risks in the business sense, but it wasn't the same as taking a risk like going into combat, where you're taking a risk on your life falling apart or being killed. But it was a risk, and they did take it, and they deserve credit for it. I think that they probably would have been successful at most things that they did because they basically have these qualities I admire, which is hard work, very smart, continuously learning, surrounding themselves with talented people, sharing the credit, highly honorable, and a lot of integrity. And I think they know how to motivate people and incent people to really work hard. And those are the things that really make people successful.
Are you a workaholic?
I am a workaholic, and that's because I really wasn't good at that many things. So if I had a lot of other talents, I would have been out playing golf, or I would have been playing a musical instrument, or I would have been doing something. I didn't have any talent, so the only thing I could do was work hard because that didn't require a lot of talent just to work hard. So I did that, and it benefited me to some extent. There some things I don't have skills in now. If I was younger, when I was younger, I would have learned how to play some sports better. I would have learned how to do a musical instrument, learn foreign languages, learn to have more social skills. But I didn't have any of that going for me, I didn't think. So I decided I'd just work hard, and it paid off to some extent.
We haven't miraculously talked about the pandemic yet. And I wonder, in that sense, for you personally, by the way, I hope you and your family are doing well. And this is an awful time for many of us. Our lives have been touched by so much fatality and so forth.
Oh, it's a tragic situation. We've now had about 205,000 people die in this country. Obviously, a lot more outside in the rest of the world. My daughter and her husband and their young 2-year-old daughter and their young 6-month-old son all got COVID from a plumber who apparently came into the house and was asymptomatic and spread it. They fortunately are okay today, and I'm fortunate I haven't had it yet, as far as I know. But I think this is very important. It's a tragic situation. Hopefully it'll get better, but it made me think about something I hope some people who are my age or younger will think about, which is this. When you get to be my age, I'm now 71. I'm a baby boomer. I used to call myself a baby boomer, at least. Now people call me a senior citizen. So when I go to Whole Foods, they say, well, Mr. Rubenstein, you can go into the senior citizen line because you're older. So I never thought of myself as a senior citizen, but now they do. I do, because people realize that if you're my age and you get COVID, you could leave this earth relatively quickly. So if you get to be 71 and you have a reasonable healthcare background and you have a reasonable access to healthcare, you have a reasonably good chance of making it to your mid-80s. The statistics would show. And if you have a problem, you can probably get a doctor that can, moderate it or modulate it. But with COVID, that's not the case. So I have really begun to realize my own mortality because I realized what happened to my daughter and my grandchildren, and it could happen to me. And so therefore you have to, in your own case, think about how fortunate you are to not get it, and what you want to do with the rest of your life comes in front of you a lot more rapidly. So I am now dusting off my bucket list. I'm trying to accelerate my philanthropy and doing things that I want to get done before it's too late. I am doing what I call racing to the finish line or sprinting to the finish line, trying to get everything done. But I realize that I've been lucky so far, and I could have been exposed to this and I could have gotten it, but so far I haven't.
I want to come back to the philanthropy in a second, but since you mentioned your bucket list and racing to the finish line, what does that finish line look like to you? What is the thing that David Rubenstein hasn't done in his life that needs to be done or needs to be redone a better way?
Well, it's a long list and it would take too long to go through it. But I would say most things that most people would like to do, I probably would like to do too. But I would say I want to accelerate my giving. I'm the original signer of the Giving Pledge,
Yes.
and I intend to give away not 50%, but all of my money, hopefully during my lifetime. And so I'm in the process of accelerating my philanthropy. I am in the process of trying to get the number of books out that I want people to know my thoughts on certain things. So I'm accelerating that. I'm doing a lot more media and television kind of things to get my views out or to experiment with something I like, which is interviewing people and those kind of things. I am trying to make certain that the most important legacy I have will be in good shape, which is my children. I have 3 children. All of them have MBAs and all of them are in private equity, the highest calling of mankind, as I like to say or jokingly say.
Very interesting.
So they all are, but in the end, the legacy you're going to leave behind is your children to some extent, if you have children. And I want my children to be well-grounded. I don't want them to be people that are seen as growing up in a wealthy family and aren't hardworking and aren't doing something to justify their own existence on the face of the earth. And so I'm spending some time trying to make sure that happens as well.
One aspect of your personal philanthropy has been called patriotic philanthropy. I think more than half of your wealth that you've contributed thus far has gone to things such as the Washington Monument and the Lincoln Memorial, right, and putting the Magna Carta in the National Archives and so forth, which you loaned. Can you, Monticello, the list goes on, talk about how you came to find that? Okay. It's a niche, right?
Well, it is. I'll put it this way. Most people, the United States is the most philanthropic country in the world. We give about 2% of our GDP every year to philanthropy. And I'm no different than most people that have money and give it away, which is, let's say, I give a lot of it and most of it to medical research and to education. But there's one niche that I pursued that I've now called patriotic philanthropy, which is probably a modest amount of the money I give away, but it gets 99% of the attention. So if I give $50 million to pancreatic cancer research at Sloan Kettering, it's, maybe it will help people there, but it's not gigantic in the terms of the money needed for that kind of problem. But if I give $10 million to fix the Washington Monument, it gets a lot of attention. Why is that? Because so many people aren't doing that. And more people are giving money to education and medical research, which are all very good things. But I decided to do this in part because I live in Washington. I made my money in Washington. I care about history and the traditions of this country. And so I want to remind people of the history and the traditions of this country. So I try to fix monuments or preserve historic documents or do things relating to history. And let me explain the reason.
Yeah.
If you don't remember history, you're condemned to relive it. George Santayana, a famous Harvard historian, once said, if you don't remember history, you're condemned to relive it. So the theory of civilization, it's fairly Darwinian. You want to advance and make progress. Well, if you don't remember the things you did wrong, you're probably not going to progress as much. In addition, when our founding fathers set up this country, they really wanted to have an informed citizenry on the theory that if you have informed citizens, you will have a better democracy and therefore a better country. Well, it turns out that we don't teach people very much about history anymore. You can graduate from almost any college in the United States without having to take an American history course, and we don't teach civics very much anymore. The result is something like this. Today, if you want to be a citizen in this country and you're a foreigner, you take a citizenship test. That test requires you to take 10 questions and get 6 of them right. You get a chance to study for it. And 91% of the people pass that test, 91%. The same test was given recently to native-born Americans in all 50 states, and only one state, Vermont, could a bare majority of the citizens pass the test, which is to say in 49 out of 50 states, the people born in this country can't pass the basic citizenship test that
Mhm.
foreigners have to take, which shows we don't know very much about history of our country. So I really want to do more to kind of promote the idea about it. And let me explain why what I'm doing is trying in one way to do that. Our human brain has evolved since we emerged from caves 400,000 years ago as Homo sapiens came on the face of the earth. The brain has evolved enormously, but it hasn't yet evolved such that if you look on a computer screen and see the Magna Carta, it has the same effect as if you go and visit the Magna Carta. Because if you go and visit it, before you go there, while you're there, and after you're there, you're more likely to read about it and expand and explore the knowledge that's available about it. Whereas if you look on a computer screen today, the brain is such that it's not the same effect as if you actually see it in person. Maybe 100,000 years from now, or maybe sooner, if you look at the Magna Carta online, you'll have the same effect as seeing it in person. But right now, if you see the real thing, it has a better effect. So that's why I want to preserve these things and have people visit these places.
There is no reflection there, but now is a time when we're all, remote, that you could really make a difference, and people who have the technological abilities to create an experience to engage with documents or something like that could be timely.
Yes, but this is a very important point you're raising, which is to say that in this period of time, you can't visit museums, though some are now, the Smithsonian is now opening up museums and other things are opening. But during this period of time, you can conduct your life, and you could have a reasonably good life if you have internet access in your home and high-speed internet access. But suppose you don't have internet access, suppose you don't have access to these kind of computers and so forth. What happens to those people? Well, what's happening is the people who are at the bottom of the economic strata, who are the people who are where they're not going to be people who are more likely to be the most successful people in our country financially and otherwise. These people are falling into what I've called the COVID crater. Increasingly, these people are going to be left further and further behind. So you and I and everybody watching today, we have access to high-speed internet, and we have the ability to kind of make some decisions about what we want to watch and do and so forth. But a lot of people don't have that, and those people are falling further and further behind. So it's a real challenge when we finally get rid of COVID, hopefully we do soon, whether people who are who've fallen so far behind, can they ever catch up to people who have this kind of access and who have this kind of technology? I'm not sure they can anytime soon.
I have so many questions about your philanthropy in general, also the business of private equity that you're in and what's going on in our global economy. I want to remind our audience on YouTube Live that you can submit questions that I will pose to David Rubenstein about leadership, about anything you want that's happening in our country, in our world. We're heading into a consequential election. We are in an economy that's devastated, worst perhaps for some, for many since the Great Depression, and we have so much social upheaval. So please send your questions to us, and I will get to as many as possible. David, on the philanthropy and regarding our national heritage and history, we've seen really something with the social and racial injustice and its consequences in protests, that there's been a movement to remove monuments, and you've restored monuments. Right. I'm wondering if you have been thinking about how you might direct and accelerate your philanthropy to other aspects that would showcase American history. Where's the need? What are maybe back in your hometown of Baltimore or other places throughout the country?
Well, I am getting involved in a number of educational programs. In fact, I hope to be soon starting an educational program on history that'll be broadcast hopefully on PBS relating to history for children and for high school students. And I do other things that are designed to educate people. But I do think it's an important point you raised. I did put up the money to redo the Custis Lee Mansion, also known as Arlington House, at the top of Arlington Cemetery. But I've written an article asking that we rename it and not call it the official Robert E. Lee Memorial, because I think it's probably not appropriate in this environment to call it the Robert E. Lee Memorial. And I guess Congress is considering doing that. I think that on the monuments and memorials issue, I think that if you have a monument or memorial that's put up principally, if not solely, to remind people of segregation and racial discrimination, then I think that is probably not a good thing, and maybe that monument or memorial should be taken down. But the Washington Monument was not put up because George Washington was a slave owner. It was put up because of the other things he did. So I think in the case of the Washington Monument, Jefferson Memorial, things like that, we should remind people of the good and the bad that these individuals did. but we should not tear them down if they did one thing bad, but that's not the reason the monument is there. So for example, when I put up the money to fix up Monticello and restore it, I insisted that the slave quarters be built out. The same with the Montpelier, James Madison's home, so people can go there and see the good things that these people did, but also understand they weren't perfect people, as nobody really is. So we will have no monuments and no memorials if we're looking for the perfect person who's never made a mistake. Now, obviously, being a slave owner is bigger than just making a mistake. But I do think that we should recognize that these people were flawed individuals in some respect, but they did some extraordinary things, and they deserve to be honored for the extraordinary things they did.
Very good. I have a question from Derek Olson, who is president, president of World Oregon, one of our affiliates in Portland, Oregon. And he asks, can you please comment on Bill Gates, his decision to leave Microsoft to launch his foundation, and how he became such a key part of the country's work to combat COVID-19? And we should say that this is a joint effort with Bill and Melinda Gates, their foundation, and both of them are mentioned in your book.
Right. Yes, for separate things. Bill for his whole life, philanthropy and so forth, and also for what he did at Microsoft. Melinda, for her own philanthropy, she has a special effort, and she just had a book come out on what she's doing to help women who are really poorly served in so many poor countries in the world. But John D. Rockefeller was the richest man our country's ever had. He had about 4%, maybe 5% of the GDP of the country. The GDP of the country today is, let's say, $20 trillion. So if somebody had 4%, they'd have roughly a net worth of about $800 billion. Well, nobody has an $800 billion net worth. So John D. Rockefeller was the wealthiest man ever in our country in relative terms. And he retired when he was 47 years old. So you kind of say to yourself, maybe that makes sense. If you're worth $800 billion or the equivalent, why do you need to keep working? So he decided to retire and basically devote himself to family and philanthropic matters. Bill retired pretty much in his early 50s. I think he gave up being the CEO when he was 51 or 52. And then he devoted himself to philanthropy, which he hadn't really been that involved with before. His father had done a lot of it. And now he's really devoting himself to full time. I think he deserves enormous credit. And I think Jeff Bezos, who hasn't devoted himself full time to it, but he's given away staggering amounts of money also. Think about this. In the history of this country and the history of the world, whoever was the wealthiest person in the world or the wealthiest person in the country, generally they led reclusive lives. Howard Hughes, relatively reclusive. J. Paul Getty, relatively reclusive. These are people that just isolated themselves from the rest of society because they couldn't deal with the wealth and other problems that came along with having that much wealth. Bill and Jeff and other very wealthy people today are not isolating themselves from society. They're trying to tackle the social problems that we've inherited and to some extent that they think they can do something about. I think they deserve a lot of credit for doing that. And Bill has really made himself into a knowledgeable person on medical issues. He's not a trained doctor. He's not a trained epidemiologist, but he knows this stuff pretty well. And he's very smart and can talk directly with doctors and understand exactly what they're saying.
There's another question from Andy, who asks, what is David's take on Anand Gridharidas's critique? And this gentleman, you may or may not know, is an American writer who feels that the elites and their, well, he calls it a charade of giving. Could you talk about the notion that billionaire philanthropy is not all it's cracked up to be? I don't view it that way. And Jamie Dimon, to take another of your subjects, says, look, I'm good at banking. My social contribution is to make a great bank and to create wealth that allows for many other people to do things for themselves and support society. So there is that attitude. What are you talking about?
Well, I don't want to say our system is perfect. There's no doubt that people are making enormous amounts of money these days. And in the end, they've decided to largely give it away. I think most people who are my generation or younger have concluded that piling up large sums of money so you can be buried and own and have 10 billion or 20 billion or 30 billion at the time you're buried is not necessarily the most appropriate thing to do. So my generation and the younger generations have concluded that giving away the money is a better thing. So the question is, should you give it away by giving more of it to the government, let the government give it away, or should you make the decision yourself about what to do with it? And I can debate the idea that letting philanthropists give away the money has some virtue to it because they can get things done more quickly, more efficiently. They can actually lead the government in some ways. A lot of what Bill Gates has done has led the government to do more in those areas. So I think the system's not perfect. Nobody said the capitalist system we have is perfect. Nobody said the philanthropy system we have is perfect. But show me a country that has a better system. Show me a country which is doing more in the philanthropy area. So yes, billionaire philanthropists sometimes can pick weird projects to be focusing their attention on, and some of them wouldn't be the greatest things in the world, in my view. But we always have these kind of imperfections in the system. On the whole, I think what the philanthropists are doing in this country is generally pretty good. Yes, they do have private planes and a lot of houses, and maybe they have a lot of artwork, but generally, the people that you most respect are the people that are really giving the bulk of their net worth away.
To your point, the New York Times carried a story today that the pandemic is likely to prompt a rapid increase in child labor around the world, the use of child labor, and that maybe it can't be assumed that corporations are going to address this transparently or quickly or what have you, and that government coordination would be very difficult to come to the point that you just made. And it might be that philanthropists will fill that gap. How do the conversations go among the richest of you who have all signed on to the giving pledge to give more than half of your wealth away? What are you meet, maybe this year you've met virtually. What are the big issues in philanthropy that you discuss, the best practices that you share, how you look at problem solving?
Number one issue is, what do you do with the money? So if you say, I'm going to do it area A or area B, how do you make it effective? How do you not squander the money? How do you not make it just an ego project? How do you make certain that you're hiring good people? What are the metrics that you use to figure out whether you're having the impact you desire? Should you focus on one area alone, just make it climate change and not spread your interest in many different areas? Or should you say, I'm not going to just focus on one area because one area is not one I can really have that much of an impact on? In my own case, what I tend to do is I look for things that I can start that wouldn't otherwise get started. I can finish something that wouldn't otherwise get finished. I'm likely to see the benefit of it or the impact of it in my lifetime. And also, I'm going to have some intellectual interest in staying involved, because I like to remind people that philanthropy is a bastardized word. Today, we use it to mean giving away money. But the original Greek word was really designed to say that philanthropy is loving humanity. And you can love humanity with your time, your energy, your ideas. And so if you are a person who, let's say, created Teach for America, you didn't necessarily give money, but you did something great. And I regard that as a philanthropic act. And so what I want to do is make certain that I'm not just giving money, but I'm trying to be involved so that I can stay connected and improve things that I've done before in terms of the gifts, and actually show people that I care about doing more than just writing a check and feel like I can just leave after I've given the check. That's not what I'm about. So I try to, those are the standards I use. People have different standards. One of the most challenging things is, what do you do with your children? So if you have a lot of money and you want to give it away, are you being a role model for your children? Yes, maybe so. Should you let your children give away some money as well? Maybe so. Should you let your children live off of the wealth you've created and not have to work at all? I don't think so. But it's a complicated thing about what you do with your wealth and how you involve your children in it. There's no perfect answer to it. Some people will give each of their children money to give away. Some will give them money to let the children come collectively together. And some will say to the children, come into a family foundation. There's no perfect way, but many times people who have a lot of money are figuring out what they can do with it with respect to their children. And of course, the oldest problem that we all have is that while things have changed in the last 20 years or so, generally people got very wealthy and felt comfortable giving away money when they tended to reach their 60s, 70s, or 80s. Well, you're not going to be living another 60, 70, or 80 years, most likely. So you've got to race to give it away, and you've got to do it relatively quickly at that age. And so what a lot of us are trying to do is encourage people to get involved earlier in philanthropy. And the most important thing the Giving Pledge, I think, is really doing is not getting money from the wealthiest people, because if the wealthiest people in this country give away half their money, it's nice, but it's not going to solve all our problems. You have to get everybody to want to do something. And everybody has to give their time, their energy, the ideas, and if they have money, fine. But only if the average person and the upper middle income people, if they get involved, that's going to make a difference. The billionaires, there aren't enough billionaires out there to really make a difference.
And in fact, everybody can be a philanthropist. It can be a daily event that doesn't require money, as you suggest, and we can practice it every single day.
Yes, remember this. When de Tocqueville came here in the 1830s, he said, I can't get a hold of anybody. Everybody's volunteering for things. All they're doing is they're running from one meeting to another meeting, volunteering, because our country didn't have a lot of wealth then, so people had to chip in. And the most valuable thing you can give is not your money. You can always make more money if you care about making money. You can't make more time. So if you give your time, that's your most valuable commodity.
Point taken. Well taken. Lisa Falsco, we all do that here at World Affairs Councils, and we're really thankful for our boards of directors and the time that they give selflessly to see that conversations about global affairs happen in our communities and that we don't get an isolated, inward-looking America. Lisa Falsco, our president and CEO from World Affairs Council of Alaska in Anchorage, says, curious about your thoughts on the importance and significance of passion as it relates to leadership and success. Maybe, David, you could draw on a couple of examples from your book, perhaps Richard Branson or Marilyn Houston, CEO of Lockheed Martin, or others.
Well, you have to have passion for whatever you do in life. And I've told people all the time, if you want to be successful in life and be a leader, you have to find something you would love. So I didn't love practicing law, and the law didn't love me, so I got out of it. And I tell my own children and other people's children when I'm speaking at a commencement or something, find something you're passionate about. You have to love it. Experiment. You might take 3 or 4 or 5 different jobs before you find something. Nobody ever won a Nobel Prize hating what they do or working 9 to 5, 5 days a week. You have to have a passion for it. And the same is true in your career as in your philanthropy. You have to have a passion for it such that you really want to make this happen and make this work and succeed. If you don't have a passion for it, the people that are working under you or the people that you're trying to induce to do more along the lines of you're doing will feel it. You have to have a passion, and it has to be an all-consuming kind of passion if you're going to really be successful, in my view.
I'd like to take you to a person who's not in your book that kind of surprised me, a person who had great passion to get somewhere. That's Hillary Clinton. You did Bill Gates and Melinda Gates in separate chapters. You did a chapter on Bill Clinton. I'm surprised that the first female candidate for US president did not make your book. You've interviewed her, obviously.
I have interviewed her from time to time. I would say that I've interviewed many people, and it's a little awkward when you send a copy of your book to somebody who you interviewed, but they're not in the book. So I have to say it's my publisher that made the decisions. It wasn't me. But there's no doubt that Hillary Clinton has been one of the most influential women of the 20th century and in the 21st century. The first woman of a major party and to be nominated for president, came pretty close to doing it, was Secretary of State and Senator, First Lady. She's an incredibly passionate person about the causes she cares about. And for a number of reasons beyond her control, she didn't get to be president of the United States. And, I had lunch with her this past summer, I think it was, and, with her husband. And, she's engaged in issues. She knows everything that's going on. She's as passionate a person as you're going to find in public policy. So she's not in the book, but that's not because she wasn't warranted to be in the book. I just couldn't put everybody in the book.
Got it. I'd like to go to questions that you posed to Ruth Bader Ginsburg exactly a year ago when you interviewed her at the 92nd Street Y. You asked, what is the greatest hope for the future of our democracy? And you might also these days take it and let us know your thoughts on what is the biggest threat to our democracy.
Well, I think she was always of the view that if you have engaged people in participating in democracy, that's a good thing. So people should vote. Sadly, only about half the people who are eligible to vote in this country. We're celebrating this year the 100th anniversary of the right to vote for women. But women and men, basically, while women vote in a higher number than men, percentage-wise, they still do not, we don't get 60% of the people who are eligible to vote voting in this country. So we need to get more people to vote, more people to learn about the facts of our society and the way the government works. And I think Ruth Bader Ginsburg was a role model for people in that way because she came from modest circumstances and basically showed what one person who weighs 100 pounds can do with the power of her intellect. And I think it was a role model for many people in that way as well.
As a philanthropist who could influence both a view about history and address a social need now, supporting those who are trying to make for free and fair elections in this country. Do you see that as an opportunity for you?
Right.
Could you talk about whether you personally make political contributions one way or the other?
I don't make any political contributions, and this is the reason. I've never contributed to a presidential campaign, and I don't. And in recent years, as the chairman of the Kennedy Center, the Smithsonian, the Library of Congress board, and other things, I feel I can have more influence with members of both sides that are not seen as partisan. So for example, I host dinners at the Library of Congress monthly when the pandemic wasn't here with members of Congress from both parties. And when I'm being the chair of the Kennedy Center or doing other things like that, I think it's better not to be involved politically. So I do not make political contributions. That's not to fault other people, but I also probably don't want to look like, I'm trying to buy some influence or something. So if I give a large contribution, if I did, I suspect the articles in the newspaper would say that Rubenstein's trying to buy access or influence somebody in improper way. So I try to avoid that, and let other people do those contributions. So I don't get involved in political kind of matters, and I stay out of politics right now.
Got it. Could you talk about perhaps the biggest mistake you've made in philanthropy or in business? Is there something that we can learn? Because mistakes are really how we do learn.
Well, we don't have 10 hours for all my mistakes, but in terms of the biggest one, the two biggest in the business world were, for sure, when my now son-in-law told me about Mark Zuckerberg, his classmate, dropping out of Harvard to start a company, and he said, you can invest with him now. He's looking for a modest amount of money. I said, this is never going to get anywhere. That company won't be successful. That was a big mistake. And then when Jeff Bezos was starting his company, he had to use the bibliography of books in print that one of our companies had. He offered to give us 20% of the company as a fee. We didn't want it. We took some modest cash. Later, when I went back and got some stock instead of the cash, he gave us 1% of the company, which is worth $6, $7, $8 billion today. And we sold it at the IPO for virtually nothing. So those were two big mistakes. In philanthropy, my biggest mistake was not starting earlier. I kind of waited till I had a fair amount of money, but I should have probably started when I was in my 30s or 40s or 50s. And it's interesting, my mother never had any real money. I mean, obviously I gave her money in the latter years of her life. She never had to worry about money. But when I was growing up, she didn't have any money. She was always, scrimping here and there. And so even though I would give her all the money she needed or wanted, and when she passed away, I would find that I was getting her mail in the future, and I was getting letters from every single philanthropic organization in the United States, because anybody that would mail her anything, she would always send money into everybody. She must have had, 500 organizations she was giving money to because she couldn't say no. But she really had a philanthropic bone in her body, and maybe that's where I got it from.
That's a lovely story. I have a question from Hildy Teagan. In an era of seeming deglobalization, what is the role of leaders in business to promote productive engagement with the world in trade and in diplomacy? What are the best mechanisms or modes for doing so?
Sadly, globalization's become a four-letter word for many people in the United States and some people outside the United States. But I think it's actually provided a lot of people getting out of poverty. And I do think that globalization's been helpful to the United States a great deal. Obviously, some people in the United States have not benefited as much as others. I think on the whole, it's been good. I think it's been good for the global economy. The world has many fewer people in poverty than it did before globalization became so prominent. Business people have a role in that they can promote globalization, and I think they should lobby their government. They should be active publicly in speaking about it and shouldn't shy away from it. They shouldn't be basically afraid to speak up and say globalization is actually helpful. It's not perfect, but it's helpful. And I think business people increasingly are talking out on public policy issues. And to the extent that there's more courage, we can have a book at some point called Profiles in Courage of business people who are speaking out, not just politicians speaking out.
Indeed. Here's a question that may go to that too. Do you believe that we're on the edge of a second renaissance? This is from an anonymous person. Or what do you think we will see on a global scale in terms of economic or political transfers of power within the next century?
Well, that's complicated. In terms of a renaissance, if you mean the flowering of intellectual activity, the type that we had in the first Renaissance, I suspect that human creativity is getting better and better with help with a lot of technology and so forth. So yes, it's much better to live today, I think, than 100 years ago or 200 years ago in terms of technology and intellectual abilities and the ability of people to learn things and hopefully make their life better. Again, what's the purpose of life? The purpose of life, as Thomas Jefferson said, is to some extent to pursue life, liberty, and happiness. He never defined happiness, but presumably happiness means you're helping other people, you have a healthy family, you can perpetuate the species if you're inclined to do so. That's what happiness to some extent is about. And I think the society is moving to, I won't know if it's another renaissance or so, but I would say we are improving society in dramatic and geometric terms and exponential terms every year compared to what it did in the Dark Ages or in the Middle Ages or something like that. So I do think we're getting better, and it's a better time to live. I just hope I'm around to live for part of it.
Here's a question about leadership, and it goes to the heart of qualities that you've identified in your book, common denominators, if you will, that leaders, great CEOs, change makers will have an ability or a desire to share credit generously and take blame generously also. There's a certain person in this city for whom the reverse is true. And if we have that leadership for another 4 years, what is that model for our society?
Well, Ronald Reagan famously said, there's no limit to what humans can accomplish if they're willing to share the credit. So I do think it's very good to share the credit. And I encourage people to not keep talking about I, but talk about we. Share the credit. If you deserve the credit, you'll get your credit. My mother always said to me, don't fish for compliments. If people think you're doing a good job, they'll let you know, but you don't have to look for them to tell you. You don't have to tell people how great you are. And that was a very good lesson. I think that the people who are the best leaders are the people who share the credit and have humility. Now, obviously, not all leaders are that way. I can't imagine that Julius Caesar or Napoleon Bonaparte were humble people. And I suspect if you were Alexander the Great and you added the great to your name, you probably weren't that humble. But I suspect that the people we most admire today are people that have some humility. And if humility is not a characteristic that is in your DNA, my advice is fake it. If you can't be really humble, at least pretend you're humble, because it's more off-putting to hear people say how great they are than to say they're not that great. And then even if they don't really believe it, at least pretend. I think it makes people feel better about you. So I will leave it at that.
Thank you for that very frank answer. That's always good in an interview. Let's close with a question from Merrill Lane. We're going to zoom out, as it were, as we close this program that's being broadcast on YouTube Live. What do you predict, this is a giant question, what do you predict will be the most major change occurring in the 21st century?
In the 21st century? Well, remember, we're only 20 years. I'm sorry.
We're only 20 years in.
We're only 20 years in. So if you were to go back to 1920 and predict all the things that happened in the subsequent 80 years of the 20th century, you never would have predicted all those things. But I suspect 100 years or 80 years from today, you probably will have people living to probably 100 years old, relatively commonly, and not in just poor health, but live in reasonably good health to 100 years old. You'll probably be able to travel around the globe in much quicker speed. You'll probably have Zoom like this, but in virtual reality and in 3D. And so probably you won't feel you need to travel quite as much, but you'll be able to. And I think with some luck, we might be able to eliminate a lot of the diseases that we have today and give people vaccinations or other kinds of things that make them live a happier and healthier life. And I hope we can have greater income redistribution so that there's greater wealth sharing and that it's not just the people on the upper part of the economy who are enjoying life.
Thank you very much for that. I'd like to thank everyone who is participating in the audience for joining us in our opening session of this virtual conference. This is Conversations with the C-Suite, Powering Global Recovery and Change. We're so delighted to have started with David M. Rubenstein, who is co-executive chairman of the Carlyle Group and author of How to Lead. And we will be coming together again tomorrow at 11 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time. We are going to present a joint event. Actually, it's with our partners, the Foreign Policy Magazine, along with the Council on Competitiveness, the U.S. Global Leadership Coalition, and Philip Morris International. The program is Driving Global Recovery, Transformational Leadership in U.S. Policy and Business. We'll extend this conversation. And then at 4 p.m. Eastern, we have former Volvo Chairman and CEO Per Gillenhammer to talk about innovation and integrity. I'm Bill Clifford, President of the World Affairs Councils of America. Again, thank you very much on behalf of the Board of Directors of the World Affairs Councils, David, for joining us today. Thank you all, and I hope to see you tomorrow.
Thank you for inviting me. Bye.